Good morning. We're going to get started in just a couple minutes. I wanted to give everyone a warning so they could grab their coffee and their donuts.
I think I brought too much stuff.
We're going to have you at a bigger table with a camera.
Oh, gotcha. Oh, yeah, I've already posted in my newsletter. They're in. Well, the interesting thing is that I was something last night to say scholarship. It's a bomb. There's some bomb on the side. Wait for it. I mean, and I think that, you know, I'm hoping a report will especially out of what we need today. One of these states we should see this legislation on the bottom here. This is one that I just had committed to expanding consumer choices in Kansas ability to access.
Hey, how's it going? That's safe.
They're on by default. Cool. But if you feel like flipping them off, it's just that switch right there. We are live streaming, so just make sure you hold it up. Okay. Even if you're a loudspeaker, it's still live streaming.
Cool.
That's it.
I know. Yeah. Here's the thing, and again, this is resolution. At any convention. But hi, how are you? I thought I'd introduce myself because I'm in your district. Okay. Rui. Karen. Rui Xu. Rui Xu.
Yeah. Growing up, people would kind of joke my middle name could be Bach. I don't have a middle name, so Reebok Shoe is kind of easy way to remember. Yeah.
Okay, that's easy to remember.
If you call me Reebok Shoe, that's totally okay too.
Okay. Okay. Well, I live in the Reinhardt area. So.
Yeah, nice neck of the woods.
Yeah. We paid $125,000 for our house.
I paid $150 for ours in
sure.
Westwood, and I think they'll probably sell it for like $350.
Yeah. Well, we moved in 94
Yeah.
when it's full. You know, I think I know things change. Well, it's good to meet you.
Used to it being in person again.
I think you're right.
And you got a K-State game, a KU game, and a Chiefs game. So, yeah.
Sure. They're on by default. But if you would like to flip them on, it's just right there. There's like a 2-second delay between turning it on and actually working. So just keep that in mind.
Okay. Thank you.
Pretty much it.
Okay. Appreciate it.
Man, I'm glad I didn't wear my
Hey, you want to listen real quick? Sure. It's on by default. You can flip it off. Just using that switch right there.
Okay.
Play the game on how to turn your body.
Okay. So it's on right now. Hey.
Yeah.
Is it Astro Gymnastics this week?
Thank you so much.
Oh.
It's in the news right now.
I didn't know they got a laugh a minute.
Oh my.
I'll answer it. Just like it's very
I got
2 hours on
I
the
think that's
sheet alone.
Seriously.
Yeah.
Hey. I was gonna say.
We are about to get started, so if you could please take your seats.
Hello. I'm good. I'm just with everything nowadays.
Real quick.
That was the first time it had been.
Good morning. On behalf of the Johnson County Library and the League of Women Voters, thank you so much for taking time out of your Saturday morning to come and talk about politics. We invited every Kansas state representative and state senator with constituents in Johnson County to participate in these. So if you see that somebody is missing from the table, feel free to reach out. Let them know you want to see them at one of these. My name is Ashley Fick. I'm the Civic Engagement Librarian for Johnson County Library. I'm your moderator for today. I want to be as brief as possible, but we have a couple pieces of housekeeping before we get started. On your chairs are note cards. That is how you ask a question. Please, please, please do not shout out, do not clap, do not boo, certainly not boo. We want to maintain a tone of civility, and we also want to get through as many questions as possible. If you maintain those rules, that really will help us out. Each legislator is going to get started. They'll have 3 minutes to talk about whatever they want to talk about what's going on in Topeka, and then we'll move into your audience questions. And so with that, I want to note that 95% of Americans agree that, mutual respect is the way to a better government. 95% of Americans, we can't agree on anything, but we agree on that. So let's start with that tone. And with that, I'm going to start with Senator Corson.
Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much for having me here today. I really appreciate it. Really appreciate all that the League of Women Voters and the library does to try to keep folks informed about our work in Topeka. I'm State Senator Ethan Corson. I represent Northeast Johnson County. I want to give you a little bit of my district boundaries just to start with. So when I was elected in 2020, my boundary was started at 47th Street, which is the Johnson-Wyandotte line, and then went south to 99th Street. Because of redistricting, I now only go out to 95th Street, so 47th to 95th Street, and then I used to have a really pretty firm boundary on Metcalf as my western boundary. I now go from state line to basically one precinct west of Metcalf. So those are my district boundaries. As far as my committee assignments, I'm the ranking member of the Senate Judiciary Committee and the Senate Transportation Committee, and I also serve as a member of the Legislative Post-Audit Committee, the Utilities Committee, and the Senate Tax Committee. I think that at least on the Senate side this year, where this is, I think, a really good panel, because I think that on the Senate side, 2 of the most active issues we'll see will be around education, and Senator Pettey is on the Education Committee in the Senate, and around tax policy, and I'm on the tax policy. So I hope that we'll get some questions about that. Would love to kind of fill you in on where I think we're going on the tax front this year in Kansas. So again, thank you for having me, and I look forward to your questions.
All right, am I on? Perfect. Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Ashley, the League of Women Voters, and everybody who showed up today. That is one of the most important things as a legislator, is to engage with your constituents and hear your views and make sure we're representing you well. I'm Mari-Lynn Poskin, and I represent Kansas House District 20. I was first elected in 2020 and re-elected in 2022, so am serving in my second term. And my district boundaries are state line, 95th down to 135th over to Mission Road, and then west of Mission Road to Metcalf between about 103rd and 127th. I'm very excited to be working on the K-12 education budget committee. That I think is one of the most important issues to my constituents. I'm also serving on commerce, labor, and economic development, financial institutions and pensions, and veterans and military. Some of the issues that I'm going to be focusing on quite a bit this year are teacher recruitment and retention. We know that we have a teacher shortage crisis, and some of the bills that I worked on last year, and one in particular that got passed that doubled the scholarship to the Kansas Teacher Service Scholarship Fund, is kind of a basis for a lot of the discussion that's happening this year around that. I was also recently elected to the Johnson County Delegation Chair position. There are 36 representatives and senators who represent part or all of Johnson County, and I'm really looking forward to trying to come around and coalesce on some issues that are very specifically related to the needs of the county. And I look forward to your questions. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Representative Jerry Stogsdill. I represent the 21st District, which we're sitting in the middle of right now. Welcome to the 21st. This is my 7th year in the legislature, and my district runs basically from 67th to 83rd state line to just a little past Metcalf. And I'm serving this year on the Democratic leadership team. There's two of us from Johnson County that are on that team. Representative Clayton is the caucus whip, and I'm the agenda chair. And that means I run the meetings in the morning where we get the whole caucus together to discuss bills that are going to be voted on that day. And we're hoping to have some good bills to discuss this year. We'll see. I serve on the Water Committee, and water is one of the most crucial issues facing the state of Kansas right now. And I was hoping that we would have another really good committee this year to discuss issues, but our leadership in the House has downgraded that committee from a 5-day-a-week committee to a 2-day-a-week committee, which was disappointing. But I also serve as the ranking Democrat on the Legislative Modernization Committee, and we haven't quite figured out what that means yet, but we'll hopefully be modernizing, because I think sometimes we're still operating in about the 1880s, but that's going to be an interesting one, and I'm sure we're going to come up with some interesting topics which we'll be able to report to you later on. I'm also the ranking Democrat on the House Education Committee, and as Representative Poskin said, we are facing a major issue as far as teacher shortages go in Kansas. And for the 7th time in a row, I am going to be introducing a bill to reinstate due process rights for teachers in Kansas. And all that is saying you can't be fired for unjust cause. And that has been rejected by our friends across the aisle for the last 7 years. And it is a major issue with teachers. There needs to be some kind of job security for those people that are doing such a great job with our kids across the state. And then finally, I am serve actually along with Representative Clayton on the Tax Committee. And there's going to be some really interesting issues in tax this year. Last year, we tried to get the state sales tax off of food. We should have had it off last July. We should not have been paying sales tax from last July to this day. But the Republican plan was 3 years, and we're going to try to get it back off immediately this year. They're going to be looking at a flat tax, which benefits, again, the wealthiest individuals in the state and puts a burden on the people in Kansas that can least afford that. So that's going to be a definite issue for us. And I'd look forward to any of your questions that you have on tax or education or that sort of thing. And thank you for coming today. We really appreciate it.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Representative Stephanie Clayton. I represent the area just to the south of here, so 83rd south to mostly 103rd, Metcalf to State Line, and now I've picked up a new portion that that includes sort of that old Leawood area, and so absolutely love it. Just finished up from a pretty intense campaign where I got to knock on a lot of doors and see a lot of you, and so was happy to be elected to my 6th term. Sounds like I've been here longer than I have, though. The House only has 2-year terms. And so, as Representative Stogsdill said, I am House Minority Whip. This is my 2nd term serving the caucus in that way. And it's particularly important to have that role. As you all know, I served 3 terms as a Republican, and now I'm in my 3rd term as a Democrat. And in the House, we are 2 seats short of sustaining vetoes or blocking supermajorities. And so this means that it is essential to work across the aisle if we want to get any type of results. And so I spend a lot of time visiting with my Republican friends trying to find common ground. I am on the Federal and State Affairs Committee, which handles some of the most controversial issues. So if it's liquor law, if it's gaming, if it's cannabis, if it's abortion, you know, all kinds of stuff, guns, it all comes through that committee. And so that kind of wakes me right up in the morning at 9 o'clock. And then I'm also on the Commerce, Labor, and Economic Development Committee, incredibly important here in Johnson County, and I serve on tax with Representative Stogsdill. I'm also on a committee called the Rules Committee. So any of you who follow the legislature who sometimes become frustrated by various procedures or various motions or wonder why things, people are always finding loopholes to get somewhat nefarious things done, a lot of this is through just our various procedural rules. And so this is my second term serving on that committee, and I will be talking about some of those wonkier aspects of legislative procedure. I've introduced a great deal of bills this session, so was proud to introduce one that eliminates the sales tax on feminine hygiene products and diapers for all ages, and so really hoping to get some headway on that legislation. We'll be co-sponsoring a bill with a very conservative Republican colleague of mine that eliminates the sales tax on all food, not just groceries, but prepared food at grocery stores and at restaurants. Not all families can afford the time to go and prepare a meal, and frankly, I'm a terrible cook. So I spend a lot of money at restaurants, and I think this helps our restaurant industry. I'll talk more about some of the bills that I am supporting this next session, and I know my time is up. Thank you all so much for having us today.
Good morning. I'm Senator Pat Pettey. I represent the 6th District, and I'm that outlier senator that has a small portion of Johnson County and a lot of Wyandotte County, and I actually live in Wyandotte County. I live in the Turner School District, and I am a lifelong dot. But I'm, as always, excited to, as I have for now a long time, represent Johnson County. It's a wonderful part of the district, and I'm happy to be here. I've got to make a little shout out because our minority leader provided for all of the Senate minority this book, The Sum of Us by Heather McGree, and I would suggest that if you are looking for reading, even though it looks really thick, and that's what I thought, oh my God, thank you, Dinah. But I started it. It's a wonderful book. It's interesting because it's what racism costs everyone. And even though that sounds heavy, it actually is a good read. So I wanted to mention that first of all. I am starting my 11th year, actually. Representative Clayton and I came in at the same time, just on different sides of the aisle at that time. I'm the ranking on Health and Human Services. I'm the ranking on minority ranking on Ways and Means. That's a new, I was on Ways and Means last year, but now I'm the ranking. I'm on Senate Education, I'm on Confirmation Oversight, and I'm the minority whip in the Senate. I've just got to say, I'm so excited to be here. A colleague of mine in the House mentioned the other day that sometimes we get kind of heavy on the negative, but it is such exciting to be here because we elected Laura Kelly. We re-elected Laura Kelly, which is such a positive for our state in every way, and a positive for us as legislators as we work in Topeka. We also, stopped changing our Constitution to the benefit of all of us that live in Kansas. So I want to mention those things because I think they're so important. I have introduced legislation already, the Teacher Mobility Compact. It's just one piece that could be used for teacher, not necessarily teacher retention, but allowing reciprocity for teachers that move in from other states. And I'm also am very excited about what the governor has done with her executive order concerning child care. You've probably heard about that. She talked about Kansas being the best place in America to raise a family, and that this executive order establishes a committee that will develop a roadmap for us to have a Secretary of Child Care, which is paramount for us to be, if we want to make this the best place for families to live and raise their children in Kansas. This has already happened on the Missouri side and many other states. So I look forward to talking to you later.
Hi, everyone. My name is Representative Rui Xu. I represent House District 25, so that's 47th to 71st if you're in Mission Hills, and then 67th Street is the southern border in Prairie Village. I see a lot of red in the audience today. There must be a big game or something. I'm actually kicking myself. We should have introduced a resolution to ban jaguars in the state of Kansas. this past week or something. But you guys may have noticed that it has been a little bit light on actual updates thus far in the legislative session. That's because we're basically 2 weeks in. We have a new speaker in the House, and we have a lot of new chairs. And so it's really, really slow in ramping up. And so it's more of like what we're guessing might happen rather than what has actually happened. But even then, it's kind of hard because it's an entirely new speaker. So I serve as the ranking Democrat on financial institutions and pensions in the morning. I serve on commerce with Stephanie and Mari-Lynn as well. And then I am serve on agriculture. So I spend most of my time in the legislature, also hi to that side of the room, I can't really see you guys. I spend most of the time in the legislature looking at environmental issues. And so I see 4 really big ones to keep track of going into the year. So the first one is water. Water is the #1 issue for my money in the state. Without water, Western Kansas is going to be depleted pretty quickly. The second one is the oil pipeline spill in northern Kansas that we saw back in, I think, late November, early December. We're really going to keep pushing to have public hearings. I've been briefed in a private setting by TC Energy, but I would really like that to be made public, and so we can ask them questions. The third one is tangentially related to the environment. It's ESG. ESG, if you're not aware, is essentially just like an environmental social governance score that some investment banks use to make decisions. It's been a really big push by the conservatives to oppose ESG because it hurts oil companies primarily. And then the last one is kind of related to Kansas. It's federally, the lesser prairie chicken has been designated as endangered. Because of that, that really limits what ag producers can do if they're close to lesser prairie chickens, right? And so it's actually just this constant Kansas story of the conflict between agriculture and the environment. So very quickly before my time is up, I also spend a lot of time, I'm the co-chair of the Kansas Future Caucus, so that's all the legislators under the age of 45. There's 30 of us this year, and so our big goal to this group is bipartisan cooperation. So we try to find one piece of legislation every year that all 30 of us can sign on to, that we all agree on, that we agree affects our generation, and work together to achieve that goal. So excited for your questions.
Thank you. And I just wanted to note that there are some pieces of paper on your chairs, and I sent them via email that say follow up. If you hear something today that you don't agree with, that you don't like, or that you like, you can follow up with all of the legislators here or at all the other coffees. So with that, our first question. Affordable housing is a major issue in Johnson County. There's a state statute that prohibits cities and counties from requiring apartment developers to allot a percentage of apartments to affordable housing. Would you support eliminating this restriction? What actions are being taken to address climate change and the need to develop alternative energy sources now? What about credits for solar panels or electric cars?
Yeah, so good question. Again, this is what I spend most of my time thinking about in the legislature. I'm not on the Utilities Committee, unfortunately, so I don't have the intimate details on some of that. But basically, I mean, not enough is being done to address climate change in Kansas. What we are fortunate to have right now in the state is that kind of the morality of addressing climate change matches up now with the economics of climate change policies right now, right? So wind is tremendously profitable right now in the state of Kansas. So we're seeing a very, very fast proliferation of wind turbines in the state, which is very, very good. What we do need to do is kind of explore kind of the newer opportunities available for the state. We're going to have a lot of money coming in with the Inflation Reduction Act, which provides a really big opportunity. So for example, in southwestern Kansas, again, because water is rapidly depleting there, there's a lot of opportunity to expand solar energy, right? They get a tremendous amount of sun down there. We do need to work a little bit with the KCC to kind of smooth that going forward, but that's something we're going to do. I've also had a couple briefings on, for example, geothermal energy. Kansas is a big oil and gas state currently, but it's actually very easy to kind of turn fracking technology into geothermal energy, which is actually very nice. You're just digging really deep holes into the ground and using the Earth's natural heat to heat up water. Most of energy is just heating up water in various forms. So that's something that we're going to be looking at as well. One big thing that we can really do as a state that's been kind of voted down the last couple of years is creating an energy office. Right now we have one, but it's nested within the regulatory office, the KCC, which is like a really weird conflict there. And so we're trying to pull it out of the KCC and make it its own office somewhere, whether that's under the governor's office or commerce or the environmental office or something like that. We're trying to make that its own independent body to execute on a statewide energy plan to try to address it. So, you know, we're not talking about like, I can't say like the Green New Deal here in Kansas, but there are various policies that when you put together create a really effective climate change policy, which we're pushing to do.
Yeah, I might just say something about that. We got this a couple days ago. It's the Republican policies that they're going to be working for this year in the legislature, and I thought this one was an interesting one. It says, authorize the Attorney General to investigate companies that conspire to constrain the fossil fuel industry. We see this in tax all the time, that people are coming in and trying to get tax breaks for, again, the gas and oil industry. It's not surprising that Koch Industries out of Wichita is big into gas and oil. And we've also have, unfortunately, Pat has to work with these people. There's at least 2 senators over on the Senate side that are just adamantly against wind power and just total climate deniers. And I had sat next to one of them at dinner about a month ago, and it was at a professional engineers dinner, and they were talking about the water crisis in Kansas, and I asked her, I said, I told her, I said, until we can address the climate change issues and so on, and start addressing some of those issues, we're not going to get any better in water, solving water problems in Kansas. And she put her hand on my arm and she said, oh dear. She said, no reputable science in this world believes there's anything such as climate change or global warming. And you can't argue with that. So. Anyway, that's something that we really need to work on, and Rui does a great job of supporting and representing our environmental interest in Topeka. So that's going to be an ongoing challenge and an ongoing responsibility for us to address that issue.
My colleagues have done a great job addressing this question. I will just add one thing. As a legislative member of Climate Action KC, one of the things I really like about it is that they talk about what you can do from an individual level, a local level, a state level, and a regional level, and a federal level. So one of the things we really need to watch in the legislature is retaining and protecting local control so that we can deal with things at the local level.
What do you see happening with public schools in this session? I can repeat it. What do you see happening with public schools in this session?
Well, there's already rumors about, there's going to be a push for vouchers. There's already a bill that's been introduced to expand the scope of the private schools scholarship program that's already in place, and that's come up before to raise the income level for a family that's sending their children to private schools, as well as to make it available for high school. So was just introduced last week. The governor has in her budget, which was introduced to because she thought she had COVID, and ended up she didn't have COVID, but we haven't had the state of the state. That'll be next week. But I sat on Ways and Means, and so we did have a presentation to the Joint Appropriations and Ways and Means of the governor's budget. Great budget. and I'm not just saying that because she's the governor. Well, I am saying because she's the governor, but she's very savvy on the. She was on Ways and Means for 12 years before she became the governor, so she's knows those details intimately. But she, proposes to fund our K-12 program. This will be the 5th year in a row that we have been fully funding K-12 education. There's, and also as part of her proposal to fund special ed with a 5-year build up to a 90% of costs. It's that the cost of special ed, well, as you probably already know, special ed has to be funded, and the costs for special ed services have to be provided even if there is that amount of money is not coming through the state budget. So that means that the general funds of our school district are picking up those excess, and those are in the millions and millions of dollars across the state and all the school districts in Johnson County, but across the state as well. So those are going to be, but the big, those are going to be issues. I just don't. They're going to be fought by just refer to other people that want to see our public funds go other ways.
I'd say in the House, we're going to be looking at 2 really bad bills again coming through the Education Committee that we were fortunate enough to kill last year, but they're back again. And the first one is, and I'll read their description of it, work to implement fairness in women's sports until it gets enacted. That was the transgender bill from last year. And this is just a major problem in Kansas. I called the High School Athletic Association last year, and I said, exactly how many transgender kids are registered in the state of Kansas? Because anybody who's not only sports, but debate, band, anything like that, they have to register with the High School Athletic Association. And they said, well, we have 1 boy registered out of that is transitioning to a girl, 7 girls that are transitioning to boys. And they said, as far as we can tell, none of them are participating in anything. So it is a scare tactic they are using all across the country to, and it's just a hateful bill. It is terrible for those kids that are dealing with that issue and so on, and hopefully we'll have enough Republican support to go with us to kill anything that comes up this year. The second one was called the Parents' Bill of Rights. Sounds good. Awful bill. It would allow parents to come in and basically just remove books from our library shelves. It required teachers to put their lesson plans out for parents to look at the beginning of the school year to the end of the school year. That's impossible. If anybody's taught in the room, you know that you cannot do lesson plans for an entire year. And and again, we had enough Republican moderates that saw the destructive power of that and came over and we got that killed again. But it's just almost unbelievable to me that they keep bringing these issues up that really damage our schools. On the transgender bill last year, we had every Chamber of Commerce in the metro area send us a letter and say, for heaven's sakes, don't do this. If you do this, we're going to be looked at just like North Carolina and some of those other, and we won't land the World Cup. We won't have conventions coming here. It'll be a disaster economically, let alone educationally. So we'll be fighting some of those things, but I do have we have a new chairperson for the House Education Committee this year, and I think he's going to be a lot better to work with than what we've had in the past. So I'm hopeful that we'll get some good legislation through the Education Committee this year.
Again, thanks to my colleagues for that. I will tell you that Representative Xu said that the session is starting off a little slow and sluggish, and I guarantee you that's not the case in K-12 budget on the House side. Senator Pettey mentioned the expansion of the low-income tax credit for the scholarship program. In addition to increasing eligibility of students who can take advantage of this, one of the things that I was just reading it yesterday is that it changes the credit to 100%. And let me tell you how that works. Let's say you donate, under the current status, if you donate $10,000 to one of these scholarship organizations, you will get a $7,000 tax credit on your tax liability to the state of Kansas. That is not the same as if you donate $10,000 to, say, the MS Society. You have to work through a different process and it becomes a modification of your adjusted gross income. This is exactly, it takes it off. So it transfers the money that would go to the state general fund into these scholarship organizations. When you change that to 100%, that means you can figure out what your taxes are. And let's say you owe the state of Kansas $5,182. You could donate that to one of the scholarship programs and pay nothing to the state of Kansas. I think that is a very bad precedent and a very bad road to go down. And in terms of the urgency of this, that bill is going to be heard on Wednesday, January 25th, in the K-12 Budget Committee. If you have concerns about those changes to the scholarship program, I urge you to not just email your representatives, email the committee members, but please submit testimony, because a lot of the education bills that we saw last year that they tried to push would have 2 or 3 or 4 proponents who were out-of-state think tanks. And then we would have 50 or 60 actual Kansas citizens who testified against it. So when you email us, that doesn't go on the public record, but if you submit testimony, it will be on the public record, and we can show how many of our constituents are against this type of legislation. We will also be hearing on Tuesday, January 24th, like I said, we are out the gate, House Bill 2030 that allows non-public school students to participate in activities regulated by Keisha, and allowing non-public school students who enroll part-time in public school to participate in non-public school activities. So all of those extracurriculars are going to be open to private school students that our outstanding public schools offer. So again, I'm running out of time, and that's just an overview of what's coming very quickly. And I would urge you to follow the K-12 Budget Committee and the House Education and Senate Education Committees online. And if you have questions about that, I will stay and show you on my computer how you can do that. Thank you.
Since there are surplus funds, is there any chance for a cost of living increase for retired teachers? Pensions have not increased since 1998. Kansas is one of the few states that doesn't have a COLA.
That's not in the governor's budget. And I'm just going to, from the Senate side, there's seems to be, at this point, no appetite for a cost of living. It always comes up about that we are a defined benefit plan. And I think I've not introduced this, but I'm planning on introducing a bill for a 13th check. I think there might be might be support for that, for a 13th check. You know, that's one-time money. But there also seems to be interest in doing away with Tier 3 or modifying Tier 3 in the under state teachers and state employees, and so I think there's an interest in that because a number of legislators are seeing how it's a terrible. It's really not an employment plan, and that it's not a benefit or that good of a benefit, and moving them to tier or allowing them to move to Tier 2. So I see those two possibilities. I don't see on the Senate side an interest in a COLA.
Yeah, last year on the floor, I introduced an amendment to do just this, a cost of living adjustment for retirees, and then it was basically voted down along party lines. I'm the ranking Democrat on financial institutions this year, which would touch on this issue, I don't see much interest in the majority party coming through on this one either. Again, if we find opportunities to try to do this on the floor, we will, but it's going to be one of these things where we really have to make sure that if they vote against it, they have to be punished for it, because right now inflation is too high. Eggs are certainly too high right now, and so our retirees and then specifically our teachers really deserve this. Mari-Lynn, did you want to touch on your bill real quick?
Sure, and this is not related to cost of living, but I mentioned that I was going to be focusing on teacher recruitment and retention and the shortage in our classrooms, and we've heard about the shortage with substitute teachers and so forth. And so last year, Representatives Hoy and Schmidt worked on a change to CAPERS, a temporary change that would allow retired teachers to return to the classroom much more quickly and without what they call the CAPERS penalty. And so we'll be looking at that, and I believe our chair is interested in hearing that.
Will the introduction of the two-tier tax plan get out of committee or possibly be snuck into any Frankenstein tax bill later in the session? How popular is that structure with leadership in the GOP?
All right, so you're lucky that you've got 3 members of the tax committee up here. So the two-tier plan was introduced by Representative Epley in tax, and I actually gasped audibly when it was introduced. And the reason is that, Representative Epley was one of the people who was instrumental in helping us to repeal the Brownback tax plan. But he is running for the Senate now, and so, that's what you do. He did explain to me that he saw this as a less onerous tax plan than the flat tax. I would say that out of the 2 plans that are most likely to get to the floor, it is probably going to be the flat tax, because I was on the Workforce Development Committee this summer and fall and started hearing some of my very conservative colleagues talking about the flat tax, and I thought, oh boy, someone has been at ALEC and has been told that that this is the next big thing, the new hotness in tax plans, if you will. And so, unfortunately, that is what I think we will see coming forth. And we'll probably see it with some sort of a small step down of, some sort of sales tax relief, so that they can put that in there and say, oh my gosh, look at Stephanie, she's so horrible, she voted against sales tax relief. So there is a part of me that has concern, and if you guys are watching, don't you dare do it, that they would put, one of our really good sales tax reduction or elimination bills in with a flat tax. So that's just kind of how it's done. But luckily, we are all fortunate enough to represent a very savvy electorate that understands what a dirty trick bill is and what a real bill is. Thank you.
I will say on the Senate side, there's a lot of interest, as Representative Clayton mentioned, a lot of interest and momentum around the idea of a flat tax. I don't support a flat tax. I'll be opposing it. But I do think that there is a lot of interest in the majority party in that. We had a bill introduced in our committee on Thursday by the Kansas Chamber of Commerce that would introduce a flat tax at both the personal income level and at the corporate level of 5%. So keep in mind right now that our tax rates start for individuals at 3.1%, and they go up to 5.7%. On the corporate side, they're 4%, and then there's a 3% excise tax if you have taxable income of over $50,000. I think the important thing for folks to realize is that this is a way of redistributing the tax burden to lower income folks. And pushing the tax burden down on our lower income Kansans who can least afford to have this increase in tax. Because it was introduced on Thursday, we don't have all of the different scenarios, but the last time that there was a flat tax bill introduced, it would have been a tax increase on 78% of Kansans who paid taxes, because you'd have to bring so many Kansans up to that 5% rate. So I'm going to be opposing it, but it is something to watch because there is a lot of interest and momentum for it among Senate Republicans.
What standards should be considered to make the Kansas tax system less regressive and more fair? Is the 3 legs of the stool approach still working? Sales, property, and income.
Well, I think that what we need to do is to continue to drop all types of sales tax. So when I first took office, my very first session was 2013, and already we were starting to head into the red due to the Brownback tax plan. And so even Republicans saw that it was untenable to actually cut government services. And so what they started doing was raising the sales tax. So they raised it in 2013, raised it a little bit more in 2015. That was an interesting night. Lots of people crying on the floor. You know, here's the thing is that if a bill makes you cry, maybe don't vote for it. It's been a standard practice of mine that I've employed throughout my career, and I recommend it to all colleagues. But so I think the three-legged stool does work, but bear in mind that we did not fully repeal the Brownback tax plan. Our top bracket is 5.9, and prior to Brownback it was 6.12, and so our income taxes are still lower than they were then, and of course our sales tax is ridiculously high. Again, I'm happy to see that that slow reduction in grocery tax. Remember, there's a difference between groceries and prepared food and restaurant food. And so I really want to see people not be penalized for consumption. And as someone who represents a district that goes up to state line, I know y'all are going over to Missouri where things are cheaper, and I can't blame you. But that also causes problems for our local businesses. And so really the pro-business and pro-Kansas choice is to support a much lower sales tax.
The crying issue is legitimate one that Stephanie brought up, and people have asked me, said, do you do a lot of prayer up there? And I said, well, a lot of bill introductions are followed by, oh dear God. So I guess that kind of counts. But no, I think it is absolutely reprehensible that we charge sales tax on food and medicine. Those are things that keep our families healthy, and there's no reason to do that. It's a regressive tax, and it hurts working families probably as much as anything that we tax in this state. So we'll be working on that. I know I'm submitting a bill again this year, and this is kind of a perfect example of what we face up there. I introduced a bill last year to take the sales tax off of over-the-counter medications. Because I talked to several doctors about it, and they said, you know, we've got patients that can't afford prescription medications, and we don't charge sales tax on prescription medications, but we charge it on over-the-counter. And they said, we prescribe a lot of over-the-counter medications to some of our patients who we know just can't afford prescription drugs. So I introduced that bill. One of the more conservative Republicans sat right next to me, and he leaned over and he goes, oh, I like that. And I thought, I better go back and read that bill. Something's wrong here. But it passed out of tax committee unanimously. One of the few bills I've ever seen pass out of tax unanimously. And Republican leadership up there would not even let it on the floor for debate. So it's going back into tax committee this coming week, and that's something we'll be working on, is both the taxes on food and medicine in particular.
Will the legislature address medical marijuana?
Senators?
So,
Balls in your court.
yeah, and Representative Clayton's right in that. She says that the ball is in the Senate court. And the reason she says that is that the House has passed a medicinal cannabis program, and so really the Senate failed to take it up, and then the bill died, and so really the onus is on us in the Senate to get this done before putting the House through that process again. I wouldn't say optimistic about our chances of it. I'm a big supporter of it. I wouldn't say I'm optimistic, but I'm also not completely pessimistic. I think that there is a chance that we could get a bill that is going to be very restrictive, very limited, very cumbersome. A lot of people who have the ability, who live in one of the states surrounding us that has recreational and other cannabis programs, are probably just going to avail themselves of that rather than jump through all the hoops. But I do think that there is a chance that we will, late in the session, get something through that will be, again, very restrictive and very limited. But I think that there is an opportunity for that, just kind of based off some comments from Senate leadership.
And I'll just say I have to ditto what Senator Corson said. You probably already know that the President of the Senate changed the leadership on Fed and State. So Senator Olson is now the chair of Utilities, and Senator Thompson is the chair of Fed and State. And that certainly was intentional. I mean, a lot of people that were on Utilities are glad that Senator Thompson's not on Utilities, but that move is intentional, and the President of the Senate, as Senator Corson already said, has expressed the fact that, well, he isn't a supporter, and also that, but he thinks there needs to be a much more restrictive type bill. So it certainly, if it comes out, and I was very optimistic this summer about us passing medical marijuana, and then that move occurred, and so I guess I'll just say, keep your fingers crossed that it happens, so we'll see.
What does the Water Committee hope to accomplish in the next 2 years?
I don't know. Last year, or the last 2 years, we had a good group on the Water Committee. We spent 2 years studying this problem. The first year was totally informational sessions. There was finally a bill developed, 481 pages, and it was not a perfect bill, but it certainly gave us a good starting point to start seriously addressing the water issues in Kansas. On the last day of the committee, one of our members of the committee came in, introduced a bill, 4-page bill, that was sponsored by the Kansas Farm Bureau, basically saying, oh, trust us, we'll take care of this, just like we always have. And that's the bill that passed. And that legislator who introduced that bill into the Water Committee is now president of the Farm Bureau. So I think we've got a really good chairperson this year. Representative Lindsey Vaughn from Johnson County is the ranking Democrat on that. She did a great job over the last couple of years. I think she'll do a great job again. I think there is real interest on the committee to get something accomplished, because we had people from the National Geological Survey come in this last week to give us a report on what they found out about water in Kansas, and it was even more discouraging than what we had heard last year. There are some parts of Kansas where the aquifer's down to almost 25%, and when you get down that low, you can't use that water even for agricultural purposes. So it's a critical issue out in western Kansas, and keeping our water clean and our wastewater processed here in the eastern part of the state is also something that we need to focus on. We were able to get the whole Water Committee to come down to Johnson and Wyandotte County last year to take a look at the Water One facility and to see the kind of technology that is needed to keep our water clean, safe, and available. So we can't just focus on western Kansas, because we here in the populated eastern part of the state have a real interest in drinking water. So I'm hopeful, but we'll have to see. It'll probably be a couple, 3 months before we know exactly what's going to happen there.
And just to put a little bit of a finer point on what Jerry was saying, I don't know what the committee is going to do, but what kind of broadly needs to happen, just to let you guys know, is right now there's like 27 different agencies that touch water in the state of Kansas. So there's actually just a lot of bureaucratic mess that happens when we're trying to regulate water. So that's one of the issues. So part of that 400-page bill was kind of moving everything around into kind of one more centralized agency. Another part of that too, and this is kind of similar to the energy office issue, is that the chief engineer for the state is nested underneath the Department of Agriculture. And so again, there's a lot of tension always between agriculture and water in Kansas and agriculture and the environment in Kansas. And you know, it's a healthy debate to have, but again, it's somewhat of a conflict for the chief engineer who is in charge of maintaining our water levels to be under the Department of Agriculture, who basically wants to use as much water as they're allowed to use. And then overall, just kind of broadly, the goal is historically the Kansas policy on water has been controlled depletion, I would say, and I think finally we need to move, and the Kansas Water Authority has recently voted to go to a policy of no depletion, and so long term that's what we need to be doing.
The redistricting process is a long ways away, but if we are to have fair maps with politicians elected by voters, not politicians, we need to start work now. What do you support in terms of creating more fair redistricting?
So both Senator Corson and I were on the redistricting committee, somewhat dubious distinction, although we both worked very hard to do what we could to get us the most fair maps that we could. I will say that I was very pleased with the way that elections did go in the Johnson County area for the state house, and I was very pleased to see Congresswoman Davids reelected. So, despite, it was like winning a fight with both arms tied behind our backs, and we did it, and I think that that's very impressive. Now, does that mean that I'm okay with those maps? No. So I think that it is definitely time that we introduce legislation and continue to do that throughout the next decade that will put in a nonpartisan redistricting commission that is made up of lay people, not legislators, because even I felt somewhat amoral even taking a vote on the district lines of the district that I represented. That's my hand in the cookie jar, and I don't think that legislators should be voting on our own maps. So there are a number of different ways to go about changing this, but yeah, I guess I better write another bill.
So I agree with Representative Clayton. I would definitely support an independent commission. On Thursday in the Senate, I introduced a bill, and I'm trying to remember if it's what number it is, but if you look on my legislative page, it'll have that bill. But what my bill would do is it would put our redistricting guidelines from the redistricting committee, it would put kind of a cleaned up version of them into Kansas statute. Because the problem we ran into was our committee had relatively good guidelines. The issue wasn't the guidelines. The issue was that legislators just ignored those guidelines. And then when we got to the Kansas Supreme Court, the Supreme Court, in their opinion, said basically, yes, it's true that the legislature didn't follow its own guidelines, but they're just guidelines. They don't have the effect of statute, and so there's not that much that we can do about it. So what I'm aiming to do is take those guidelines, put them into statute, and so that way the next time we have a redistricting process, if folks want to challenge those maps, they can then point to not just committee guidelines, but actual Kansas statute that's being violated. And so my bill talks about things like requiring that the core of existing districts be protected, requiring that communities of interest be a factor in redistricting, requiring that you cannot dilute minority votes as part of redistricting. It talks about you cannot draw a redistricting plan that has the purpose or effect of favoring or disfavoring a political party. So things like that, I'm hoping to get that into the statute books this year.
And I'll use this opportunity, because it's kind of tangentially related, to talk about a couple of pretty bad elections bills that have been introduced already this session. One of them gets rid of the 3-day grace period for advanced ballots. Right now, if your advanced ballot is postmarked by Election Day, there's a 3-day grace period to receive those. This would get rid of that. That would dilute legitimately cast votes, in my opinion. There's one that would move the state to be a runoff state if a statewide candidate does not get 50% of the vote, like in Georgia. That's like super expensive, right, to essentially administer a new election. In my opinion, if you want to do that, then you can just do ranked choice choice voting, which is literally the exact same concept, but just kind of instantaneous and built into the process. And the third one that I was looking at really heavily regulates the use of ballot boxes to turn in your advanced ballot. So those are all kind of tangentially related to redistricting, but obviously over the course of 10 years, if we keep restricting ballot access like this, then the redistricting process just will be a lot more messier in 10 years.
There was one that was read in on the House floor yesterday that would cross-reference welfare recipients with voting. That was gross and introduced by Representative Wagoner out of the Hutchison area. So especially since League of Women Voters really heavily watches the election committee, if you want to see something disgusting, just go look at some of those bills that got read in yesterday on the House floor.
Wow. I missed that one.
Yeah, that was yesterday during pro forma. I'm still not okay. And no one should be, because honestly, this type of voter disenfranchisement is an issue. I did introduce a bill that I've introduced for a number of years, automatic voter registration. So when you turn 18, you're registered. Felons who, once you have served your time and paid your restitution and are done, you're automatically back on the voter rolls. So many people who have committed a felony don't realize that in Kansas, once you have done your time, you are eligible to vote again. If you get any sort of assistance, whether that be from KDHE or from Department of Children and Families, registered to vote. So I'm sure that it will not see the light of day for a hearing, but we have an amazing ranking on our House Elections Committee. That's Brandon Woodard, and he does the good work, and I know that he is a strong advocate for voter rights, and I'm happy to have him on our team.
Well, I will follow that up with, we are really relying on the electorate to help us with the redistricting process. In that, we have referenced the supermajority before, and when there is a supermajority, they can pass what they want and they can override vetoes. So we are 2 House seats away from breaking that, and I'd like to see us do that in 2024. Make sure you are informed, get your friends out to the polls and so forth. And this isn't, again, specific to redistricting, but I reintroduced my campaign fair practice bill, which basically says that if a candidate signs voluntarily the statement of fair campaign practice, that there is recourse if they break that. So kind of a truth in campaign bill. Also will not see the light of day again, but put it out there every year. Thanks.
I have one final question that I think we can get to if we keep all of our answers brief. What can be done in regards to regulating the Turnpike Authority? The new toll collecting system is a little extreme. All the jobs that are being lost, they are being taken away by machines.
Is anyone on transportation?
I don't have a good answer. I don't know. Like, this is not an issue that I've really heard percolate up at all. So if you're the one that asked that question, I would love to learn more about it.
Well, and I haven't heard that concern either, but what I will tell you is that one of the issues that we have in Kansas right now is actually a workforce shortage. And so if jobs are being lost to machines on the highways, there are other opportunities, and we would really, like to see folks either take advantage of our scholarship type of programs to become skilled in another area, or there are just a lot of open jobs.
I was just saying, I'm the ranking Democrat this year on transportation. We just got a briefing from them this week. I think this is a challenge. I'd be interested in learning more and about the specific kind of jobs. I will say it's something probably where we're trying to find the right balance between what is efficient and what consumers like versus trying to balance a workforce and keeping jobs. I will say, I mean, in general, the satisfaction surveys with folks who have a K tag, who are able to go through, don't have to worry about having the correct change, don't have to stop and slow down when you're trying to get somewhere. So I do think I would be hesitant to say that we should sort of, think about looking at rolling back that stuff, because when we've done, Kansas Turnpike Authority has done surveys, and users generally really like the K-tag. They like that they're able to just kind of go through and keep moving, and it really does improve the flow of traffic and just the user experience. So I'd be a little bit interested in kind of exactly how we could maybe address the workforce issue, but still keep Kansans satisfied with what we're doing on the Turnpike.
We are out of time. Thank you so much for attending and taking time out of your Saturday. We still have coffee and donuts. Also, I'd like to invite you to attend all of our legislative coffees. I have attended every single one, and I learned something at every single one. So I believe that you would, whether or not your representative is there. Thank you.